Well, good morning once again. Welcome to the Bordeaux Show, an ongoing exploration of the famed region and its wines. I'm Ron Edwards, Master Sommelier and Director of Wine Education here at Winebow. We invite you to place any questions or comments into the Q&A, as we will not be managing the chat window. So, if you have something that you would normally put in the chat, please put it in the Q&A because that's the one we're watching. Let me introduce your host, Certified Bordeaux Educator TJ Griffin. TJ has held many jobs within the wine industry, from hospitality to wholesale. Throughout his career, what he enjoyed most, though, was learning about wine and sharing that knowledge with others. As the corporate wine educator for Winebow, he now enjoys the privilege of doing what he loves full time. And now, here to discuss today's topic, the families of Bordeaux, specifically Canon, Fronsac, and Fronsac, TJ Griffin. Hey, TJ.
Hi, Ron. How are you?
I am exceptional. It's a beautiful day here in Richmond. It's going to be over 80 degrees. I was just working on the back porch instead of inside in an office. Life is lovely.
Now, we're not quite that lovely today, but it's going to be over 80 degrees tomorrow, I hear. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's fabulous for New Jersey this time of year.
So yes, so we're continuing on our journey through Bordeaux, breaking, as I've talked about in previous webinars, breaking it up into the 6 families of Bordeaux, which is how the L'École did it, and I like how they did it. And we're still in the Libournais.
And I hear we have something special going on today.
We do. Guest, right? Later on, we're going to have a special guest star on. That if anyone remembers that joined us previously, our special guest star will join us in a few minutes, Sally Evans, who owns and runs a chateau in Fronsac. So she's going to give us like the down and dirty about the appellation,
or the bright and shiny, one of the two,
or the bright and shiny,
maybe
or both.
How exciting! All right, well, get to it. I'm gonna mute so you can teach these people.
All right, so we're in the Libournais, which, as we talked about previously, is basically, the right bank. But we talked about how the right bank, often people just say right bank when they mean Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. So here we're talking about Fronsac, Canon Fronsac, Pomerol, Lalande de Pomerol, Saint-Emilion, all the satellites. And we covered Saint-Emilion and satellites and Pomerol and Lalande de Pomerol last time. And now we're going to talk about 2 of what are considered to be the most, probably the most underappreciated appellations in Bordeaux, which is Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. So here's our little map from the website, which I hope you've all checked out. And if you remember, we talked about the Côte de Bordeaux previously, and we talked about everything here except for at the top there, Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, the words, and you can see the little sort of, I don't know, is that like I'm trying to think of what that outline resembles, like the sorting hat from Harry Potter, perhaps.
That's a good call. A little bit kidney shaped. With
little kidney shaped, yeah.
Kidneys with a tumor. No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have gone there. That's not public.
I wish they had sort of picked more contrasting shades, but they didn't. And the map's great, so I can't complain. So Canon Fronsac is the smaller of the 2 appellations. That's the one, the little thing inside the kidney. And in theory, it's supposed to produce better wines, but in reality, not so much. It's not that there aren't great wines in Canon Fronsac, but there are great wines in Fronsac. So the 2 really, they have the same cahier de charge, which is the regulations. They have the same everything. The only difference is this geographical boundary. There's not really any difference geologically. There's not really any difference in terroir. There's a slight difference that we'll talk about when we get to Canon Fronsac, but the idea that one is better than the other is really misguided. So Fronsac we'll start with. And a lot of this really applies to both, Ron, as we talk about this story. So back in the day, this used to be one of the most prestigious areas in Bordeaux. In the 1630s, Cardinal Richelieu, you may have heard of him, owned some estates here. In the 1700s, and even into the 1800s, some of the highest priced and most prized wines of the entire Libournais came from Fronsac. So a couple of things happened, Ron. Phylloxera hit, and a lot of the chateau owners at that time who had made some money because Fronsac was so popular decided to replant not on the hillsides but on the alluvial soils, which would flood regularly and weren't so prone to phylloxera because of that. But those soils, as you know, aren't always the best soils for wine. So the quality started to suffer a little bit. And meanwhile, Saint-Emilion started to build up a reputation. They have the great town, the medieval town. They have the Girard, which is, I think, like 800 years old, but was revived in 1948. And they really did a great job of promoting it. So Saint-Emilion started to thrive. Pomerol came along. We talked about the Garagistes. So Pomerol started to get a reputation. So Pomerol and Saint-Emilion started going up as Fronsac and Fronsac started, unfortunately, going down a little bit. And as you've said a couple of times, I think, Ron, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more wineries that go, the more money there is. The more wineries there are, the more money there is. And it just gets better and better. Meanwhile, Fronsac had a tiny proportion of those wineries. Another thing that was perhaps misguided was in 1960s, the INAO mandated, I don't know why they did this, but they mandated a certain proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon in the vineyards. And it just wasn't really suited to the terroir, which was much better suited to Merlot and Cabernet Franc. But they had to plant because that's what they were told to do. By 2005, Fronsac wines were fetching the lowest prices of any Bordeaux AOC. But as we'll see, especially when we talk to Sally later, that is changing. Well, it has changed and is continuing to change. And it's really an exciting time for Fronsac and Fronsac.
Sounds like they had a moment of resting on their laurels combined with obstacles that they felt were unassailable, combined with increased competition, right? Sort of reminds me of a lot of times what happens in the restaurant game too, is especially if you're not in the world's most populous area and you have some really good restaurants that are doing quite well, and then other people think they want to get in the restaurant game, so they do too, and they might not be as good as the great restaurants that have the reputation, but everybody wants to eat at 7:00 and there's only so many seats, and so you start to divide the attention and the dollars. And in the event, eventually it hurts everybody once it reaches the full threshold of like, okay, now somebody's got to go. But revitalization, rejuvenation, and a new thought in the marketing campaign can often overcome that, which I'm excited to see how Sally reacts to that, because just revitalizing the name Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, is that the way to go? Or do we live on our own reputation and not worry about the region? You know, because Bordeaux is essentially about brand name. What is your chateau name, and does it matter? Is the most important over the last century at least. So yeah, it's interesting to see that decline. And as you've shown me with your research, there's no good reason for the decline of interest. There's plenty of great terroir to grow wine here. And so why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, and speaking of marketing, Sally, that's Sally's background. She's a marketing maven, so she can tell us all about it. And we had a chat yesterday, and she was telling me some of the things she's working on to promote the region. So that's going to be very exciting. So here's a little Google Earth map that shows the 7 communes of Fronsac. So Fronsac, Saint-Michel de Fronsac, La Rivière, Saint-Germain-de-la-Rivière, Saint-Agnon, Saillon, and Gargan, if I'm saying that correctly. Saillon is actually where Sally is. And you can see Villegouge pops up there. And watch this, Ron. This is my daughter did this for me because she has a much better hand at this than I do. But oh, yeah, so north is that way. So we're sort of sideways here.
I was just about to ask that question. What's the orientation on
that?
That so river looks like it's in the wrong place.
That's the Dordogne River there. This showed a much better view. I was able to squeeze in all the communes this way, so that's why I switched it. And watch this. Here we go. This is a rough, very rough, but not as rough as I was drawing, outline of the appellation. So Villegouge just was not included. It's almost like they purposely did not include it. And you and I were speculating maybe someone angered someone was mad at the town mayor when they were doing it. But
Who knows? Sally might know the old story. So you're saying there's basically a hole in the appellation around the village of Villegouche?
Yeah, you can't. It's just not included. So, but this is the outline of the kidney. But really, I guess I don't know. It's these 7 communes are the ones that and you can see here. Libourne on the bottom left, so that's the town of Libourne. So really, very close to an urban center, very easy to get to. Sally was telling me a story that I'm sure she can repeat later about some visitors that she had too. So it's right here. It's right here in Bordeaux, and we're not too far. If I could extend the map downwards, we would come on Pomerol and then Saint-Emilion. We're very, very close. So here's some numbers. 800 plus hectares, over 100 wine growers, 5 million bottles. Sounds like a lot of wine, Ron, but that's much less than 1% of the total Bordeaux production. So really tiny.
It sounds like a lot until you look at the numbers for all of Bordeaux, which is larger than majority of all wine producing countries just for Bordeaux itself.
Yeah, 5 million sounds like a lot until you put it in perspective.
5 million would be a lot if you put me in charge of selling it by myself. I can tell you that.
Yes, that would take some doing. You'd have to find some big drops, I think. 20% of the wine is exports. This is really strongly a local wine still. The main markets for Fronsac are China, no surprise there, the US, Belgium, and Germany. And about 60% of the area is covered by Merlot, and the rest of the vines are predominantly Cabernet Franc with a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. So did you ever hear this term, Ron? The Tuscany of Bordeaux?
Not until you brought it up to me, but it's a great marketing ploy, and well, that looks fairly Tuscan right there.
Yes. So it gets a sort of Tuscan reputation from the gently rolling hills. If you look at Saint-Emilion, you have the plateau, but other than that, it's pretty flat. Pomerol's flat. Really not the prettiest region in comparison, but this is gently rolling hills. You have the copses of cypress trees, the steep valleys, the fortified towers. This place has that sort of Mediterranean roof that, so it's called the Tuscany of the Gironde, or Bordeaux's little Tuscany. And here's another picture. This could be in Italy, right?
Totally. I have stood on that porch in Italy, I think, except that one's in Bordeaux.
This is in Fronsac, yes. And it's a relatively, compared to, especially in the left bank, it's a warmer, sunnier region, but it's still Bordeaux. So
I also see that pool doesn't meet OSHA standards with no barrier to anybody falling in and drowning. So hopefully it's shallow.
Yes. Well, there's that gate you have to get through that gate first, I think.
Yeah,
or just walk around the bushes.
Right, exactly. You have to go through the gate.
I love that they put a gate there. It doesn't look very deep either. I think it's just for cooling off. You won't be swimming laps in this pool, but I wouldn't mind it. So terroir, we were talking about the terroir, really great terroir, not very different from what you're seeing in Saint-Emilion, mainly limestone. Asteria is, so you see fossils of like starfish and stuff like that. That means star. Clay limestone, a soil that's one of the predominant soils, the Molasse du Fronsadais, extends into Saint-Emilion. So you still see it's named after Fronsac. Fronsadais means, of Fronsac basically. And that's that clay limestone with, sorry, I want to get this right. Mainly clay and limestone on a bedrock of limestone, clay, sandstone. So the key word there is limestone. And we know that particularly Cabernet Franc loves limestone, and Merlot likes the clay. So they have actually fared better in cooler vintages because they have that clay soil. So when it's a cooler vintage, Fronsac still does pretty well, and great water retention. And we talked about Saint-Emilion last time. On the plateau, you get the limestone soils, but if you're not on the plateau, you're not always in a limestone vineyard. The soils here in Fronsac, kind of Fronsac, are much more homogeneous than Saint-Emilion. So it's not for lack of terroir, Ron, that we're talking about. And from what I did in my reading, perhaps the wines had a sort of reputation as a little rustic, but that was more due to winemaking an investment than anything else. It certainly was not for lack of terroir.
Yes, rusticity is now a choice in today's world, or an economic pressure.
Yes.
Right? Because if you have the ability to invest in your winemaking techniques, you can avoid rusticity in any environment and with any grape, even grapes that are known to be rustic, like Gallianico or something like that. Modern technology can make that like silky buttery if that's what you want. So yeah, rusticity is no longer a regional factor, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as Sally was telling me yesterday, there's still varied quality, and there's no classification system, so you just have to know which chateaus are which. But there's some really good wine here, and it's still undervalued on the market. Jane Anson, whom I've referenced before, and I still haven't got it, even though I've mentioned it, Inside Bordeaux, which is supposed to be like a fantastic, fantastic Bordeaux book. She was writing in an article for Decanter a few years ago, and it's still true, that, in theory, these wines should be at a Cru Bourgeois price point, but they're not. They're still undervalued. So only 20% is exported, so it's not like you're going to come across a ton of it, but if you do find it, try a bottle, because chances are you'll be pleasantly surprised. So this is not Fronsac. This is a town called Baynac-et-Cazenac. It's a little frontier inland, but I wanted to show it because that's that limestone bluffs. It's a really good picture of what we see all through the region. And this Fronsac and Canon Fronsac has a higher percentage of international chateau owners than any other appellation in Bordeaux, because it's so beautiful. And actually, I don't know if the statistic is correct, but it came across it, and I assume, because I think it was Jane Anson that wrote this, 13% of the chateau are owned by Chinese owners, which is very interesting. So a large international population because of the beauty of the area. And this is a stunning view. Like I said, it's a little inland, but those limestone bluffs are all throughout Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. Not
to mention the actual land is available for purchase.
Right.
A lot harder to find. Yeah, I think I'll just go into Margaux and buy some land. Well, that's not the same conversation that hey, I'll go to Canon Fronsac and look for some, or Fronsac and find some land.
So Canon Fronsac, as we said, is a little bit smaller. Really, the only reason it was different and sort of separated out is because of Chateau Canon. The owner said, well, my wines are not Fronsac, they're Canon Fronsac. So that became an appellation. But really, as you and I have talked about, and I talked about with Sally yesterday, and maybe she can elaborate later, sometimes these smaller appellations don't do themselves any favors by sort of splitting off and want to be their own identity. And they would really be better off sticking together as a rising tide lifts all boats. And Sally told me that is happening. So Fronsac and Canon Fronsac are coming together. They share a website, which is great. And she's actually working on that website, which is fantastic. So Canon Fronsac comes from these two communes, Fronsac and Saint-Michel de Fronsac. So it was hard to draw the outline, but again, my daughter helped me with that. So cheers to her. So that's roughly where you're seeing the outline of the appellation. So for Canon Fronsac, some numbers. Much smaller, 250 hectares, about a little over 40 wine growers, 2 million bottles. And but for some reason, maybe it's because of that supposed reputation for better quality, 30% of the wines are export as opposed to 20%. And the main markets here for Canon Fronsac are England, Belgium, and China. I said there was a small difference in terroir between Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, although, again, Ron, the two communes, you can choose to be either Canon Fronsac or Fronsac. It doesn't, I believe you have the choice to how to appellate your wine. But you see these south-facing slopes, and you can see right there, and you see those patches of white. We know what that is, right? And you're right by the water. So this is what Canon Fronsac is sort of known for, these south-facing slopes, but there's not a lot of it. And other than that, it's very, very, very similar to Fronsac as a whole. Okay, here we go. I'm going to introduce, we're building up to our special guest. So this is Chateau Georges VII in Fronsac, and it's actually in the commune of Saillant, as we talked about earlier. I'll show you where that is. Isn't that beautiful? And you can see right there, Saillant is not showing up because it's right there. I pinned Chateau Georges VII, but that's right in the commune of Saillant. So very close to everything, but not close. Close enough to go, but far away enough that you are on your own in, as Sally said earlier, the middle of nowhere. So I'm going to introduce Sally now. I'm going to show this background right here. This is her tasting room. There she is in the back. And Sally Evans is the owner and proprietress of Chateau Georges VII, and she is a certified Bordeaux educator, and that's how I met her when we were at the L'École in Bordeaux, which seems like a long time ago, but was really only a couple of years ago. And she's been kind enough to join us from her chateau to tell us all about Fronsac and Ken Fronsac and her winery. Welcome, Sally.
Indeed. Welcome, Sally. It's so nice of you to join us. It's really awesome of you to take some time out. And what a beautiful tasting room. Nicely done.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for having me.
So I've been talking about you this whole presentation. So if you don't mind telling us all and telling the group a little bit about yourself and how you came to Bordeaux. You don't sound like you're French and your name Sally Evans isn't very French. So what is your origin story, Sally?
Okay, well, I'm originally from England, but I have lived in France for 28 years. So I have actually now got dual nationality, which makes things a little bit simpler with French bureaucracy. But no, I have lived in France for a long time, but I discovered Bordeaux 6 years ago. That's I was living in the southeast of France near Cannes, and previously to that in Paris. And I had my main career living in Paris and living in the south of France. And then once my children had left home and I had given up my corporate career, I decided to start studying wine. And as you mentioned earlier, marketing was actually my profession. I used to work for a big consulting company that you might know called Accenture. And then once all that was done and I felt freedom to do what I wanted to do, I started studying the WSET courses. And as I soon got into the WSET courses, realized that I wanted to get my fingers in the soil, I wanted to get my nose in the barrels, and decided that Bordeaux, with the great reputation it has, was probably the place where I should try and make wine. So if people who know a little bit about the geography of France, France is a lot smaller than the United States, but even so, it was an 8-hour drive from where I lived in the southeast of France to where I am in Bordeaux now. And so I came to Bordeaux and decided to do both a wine tourism and winemaking project. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Well, it looks like it's successful so far. So congratulations on that. So Chateau Georges VII, where did that name come from? Who's George VII? Right.
Well, as everybody knows, one of the main criteria for choosing a new name these days is to be able to get a URL so that you can have the website. So that actually was one of the drivers for finding the name. But because I bought a set of dilapidated buildings and the vines around it, that belonged previously to another chateau, there was no name. So if you buy most wine chateaus, then you inherit the name and you carry on, and you've got the wine stock and you've got the history, good or bad, that goes with it. Whereas I was starting from scratch. So when I lived in Paris, I used to work on the Avenue Georges V, which people know, very well thought of in French, known the world over. And so there was a little bit of a personal tie there. But mainly, George works really well in English and French. And it really is a name that's tied to history, tradition, has a very good reputation in both languages, in most languages, in fact. And also, George is the patron saint of England. And then the 7 represents a forward-looking approach. So Bordeaux wines with a forward-looking twist, with a bit of innovation, and new generation wines, if you like. And the 7 brings good luck. And also the next King George of England will be George VII. So Queen Elizabeth's father was King George VI. And the little Prince George, who is William's son, will be King George VII. So that was a little bit of a nod to my roots, but also coming up with something that had a 7, so I could get the URL.
So it shows your marketing mind at work there in the creation of the name.
Yeah.
So did you look all over Bordeaux? Did you specifically go right to Fronsac? What was your search like?
So when I was looking, I wanted somewhere pleasant to live. You know, people who have visited Bordeaux will realize some places are prettier than others. As you've mentioned, Fronsac is very pretty. It became clear I had looked at somewhere Blaye, which is further north, and Bourg, which is further north. I felt that that was a little bit too far from the city for me, because I wanted to be able to get to Bordeaux, and also from a wine tourism perspective, be able to get people to come out of Bordeaux and visitors to the region to be able to come to me in about half an hour. So that was one. And somebody gave me a really, really good piece of advice. They said to me, buy the best appellation you can afford, because although we find that there are good quality wines in the lesser known appellations, and there are not so good wines in some of the ones that really should have a very good reputation, the appellation system still does drive a lot in terms of reputation and even, you know, prices you can get for your wine with certain audiences. So antiquated though it may be, unfortunately, it still is a driver for many things. And so the best appellation I could afford was Fronsac. If I'd had perhaps a little bit more high, you know, thought, maybe I would have bought a smaller property. I only have half a hectare, and Saint-Emilion Grand Cru would have brought me more in terms of price per bottle, just through the reputation of the appellation. But Fronsac, as you said, it is known by those in the know that it's actually very good quality wine. So my thought was the potential here is great. And let's see what I can do to help push the overall image of Fronsac up as well.
What do people misunderstand about Fronsac? You said, you know, those in the know. So what is everybody else missing? How do we convince the world Fronsac is back and better than ever?
I think there's a few things. First of all, in terms of marketing the appellations themselves, that money comes from a percentage that all the chateau owners pay according to the harvest from the year before. So if you've got bigger, richer appellations, then that feeds the loop in terms of more money is available to then market that appellation. So if you've got a group of smaller, less known and less well-off farmers, then that will be slightly less that goes into the pocket, into the purse to spend. However, what is clear, and as you mentioned Jane Anson's book earlier, Inside Bordeaux, and those in the know, we have an amazing terroir. So we have a band of limestone that goes right across the village of Saillant. That's not in every part of Fronsac, but lots of parts of Fronsac do have the same limestone band that's coming across from Saint-Emilion. And that really enables us to give an elegance to the wine. So I have that going across my land. And so although I do have the clay, because I have 100% Merlot here, and I do have the good clay that is really excellent in terms of water retention when we have very high heat and not very much rain over the summer, particularly the case now that we have climate change happening. But we do have the potential for elegance from the underlying limestone plateau. And if anybody who is watching this looks up some of the wines in Saillant, they are some of the most well-known wines in Fronsac. So we have a number of chateaux here, and that are really, really getting some of the high scores and actually, get some of the best prices in the region. And me landing here was completely by luck. Fronsac I knew, but I was just lucky to land in this village, which I am going to market the heck out of. So I'm going to make the most of it.
So 100% Merlot, was that what you inherited? I'm sure you could have replanted if you wanted to. So why only Merlot, no Cab Franc?
So Merlot, as you've mentioned, is the dominant grape variety here. It's quite unusual to be mono grape variety, mono cépage, as we say in French. But, I have some great examples, if only I could be as good as Petrus, who's obviously 100% Merlot, and some of the there are some fantastic 100% Merlot wines around. But my vines are 35 years old, which means they are a great maturity. They're giving really good quality. So I don't really want to rip them out. Then I only really started taking back my vines in 2017 when we had a big frost. And so 2018 is my first full vintage. So as it's a new chateau, I didn't buy any stock. So I need to make sure that I make the wines I can using the vines before I start pulling up vines. And also because I need to see what they can do before I start changing.
I'm sorry, Sally. I have a question that's popped into the Q&A. TJ, do you mind if I ask it now? Or do you have?
Please, yeah.
So Ken is asking, and you can verify the validity of what's here because he seems to know something. Ms. Evans is introducing a Chateau Georges Set Blanc this summer. Do you grow Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon as well as Merlot? And why did you introduce a white in that year? So it's a good question. Somebody's done some research on you, Sally.
Yes, that's great. So as you can see from the picture, I have a tasting room. So this was a tractor barn. And, when nobody knew that COVID was coming. And so in the winter of 2019 into the beginning of 2020, I spent a lot of money to make a tasting. This is one of the main rooms. I also have a wine lounge, and I also have a terrace over at the back overlooking the vines for sunsets. So when people come to visit, as they did last summer, at lunchtime, they might not want to drink a 14-degree or 14.5-degree Merlot when it's 30 degrees outside. So I had some white wine that I bought from a neighbor because I have a license, that I sold at lunchtime. And it became clear that I needed to add a white to my range. So I actually rented the vines from my neighbor, and I therefore made the wine here under my roof. Now, if I rent the vines and therefore take the grapes and ferment and make the wine under my roof, I can call it Chateau Georges Set. I have an oenologue who works for me called Bruno Lacoste. He trained with Michel Rolland. He works for very big chateaux here on the right and the left bank. And he also works for my neighbor where the white wine grapes grow. And those vines are visible from my terrace. And so he oversaw the grape growing. And then we brought the grapes here, and I've made a white wine. So I made it specifically for the tasting room. But because even though it's within the boundaries of Fronsac in that picture, because it's a white wine, it has to be called Bordeaux Blanc. Because in Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, you can only make appellation wines which are red.
Do you think that Canon Fronsac should allow the production of white wines, or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters. I think the point is that the appellation system is quirky. To call it a Fronsac white, yes, would probably help consumers in terms of knowing where it's grown, because a Bordeaux Blanc can be grown anywhere all around Bordeaux, and therefore it's quite hard to tell, where it's come from. But because it can be grown anywhere, it very much does depend on the chateau. I don't think it's about the terroir, whereas Fronsac red wines are very much about the terroir. My white wine, for example, I fermented the Sauvignon Blanc in new Burgundy barrels, so in new oak Burgundy barrels, and I kept both grape varieties on the lees for about 6 months. But that's very untypical of Bordeaux Blanc. So even if I called it Fronsac, would they know what the style of wine was? Maybe not. Very famous chateau in Pomerol called La Fleur, who you've probably heard of, they make a white wine and they make it in Fronsac. So they also have, there's a little bit of a precedent now. La Dauphine is a chateau in Fronsac as well, and they make white wine now. There's more and more white being made here because there are pockets of the soil which are just fantastic for white wine.
Yeah, I would think so. If you have a lot of limestone in the soil, that's a natural home for grapes like Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and on it goes. It would, and I agree with you. A tasting room should have white wine, especially if you're selling food, like on the picture there, because people come together to tasting rooms, and 5 of them might love red wine, but the 6th one, not so much, and they don't want to have to stand in the corner and not have anything to drink. So I totally agree with you there. What other secrets about Fronsac are absolutely that you're trying to like expose to the public to not only help yourself but everyone in the region that our listeners can take away as like, okay, if I see a Fronsac in the marketplace, this is why I should buy it?
Fronsac, especially the more recent vintages, I would say, you will find a very good balance of wine. I was going to say rapport qualité-prix. I was going to say it in French. That's why I'm stumbling over my words. A very good value and quality for the cost of the wine. You definitely will. You will find that there are some very high scoring wines. So I guess if you want to kind of, while you're looking at the bottle, try and find out a little bit more about the chateau, you will find some very high scoring wines in Fronsac, and they won't be as expensive as the same score in Saint-Emilion.
And you were talking about, and I've read this a few different places, that Fronsac and Canon Fronsac are coming together, and you are behind that effort. You are working on the website. You had it translated into English. So what do you see as those 2 appellations are starting to come together again?
Yes, I think that the reality of marketing 2 appellations with limited funds is just the reality of the 21st century. It's difficult. There are certain people who have vines in both Canon Fronsac and Fronsac who are only calling their wine Fronsac. It's very #Fronsac because of the simplicity and trying to get a simple message across to the consumer. There are others who are selling to a market who have heard of Canon Fronsac. That's great. They are sticking with the Canon Fronsac appellation. But as I say, certain chateaus, as they have bought vines in both appellations, they might make a special cuvée, a special wine, a specific wine from Canon Fronsac, but they might actually promote it under the broader name of Fronsac, because we just got a limited amount of what we can do. So the website, as you mentioned, is just being translated into English. It's being uploaded at the moment. So hopefully in the next week or 2, when anybody watching this goes onto the website, they'll be able to click on and go into the English version. And we're now working on all the pages, the outline of all the different chateaus. I've been working with the lady who manages the Fronsac and Canon Fronsac, administration, to actually what those headings should be and how we get that done. So I see that as, it helps me, it helps everybody, but it brings everybody up if we can get the word out about Fronsac.
So there's one thing that I did want to ask you about. I know it's probably not the happiest topic, but it's been in the news for wine lovers and for Bordeaux fanatics. Some devastating frosts recently. So can you just tell us about that generally, and then maybe how did it affect you? Was it, I think it looked like it affected everybody to some degree.
Yes, it was over about 4 nights across 2 weeks. And we were seeing all the pictures of the candles, the people burning, because there are certain things you can and can't do. We have a lot of regulations. Cost a lot more. Having a windmill to move the air is very, very expensive, and will be, only limited to certain people. I was away at the time, but because we have some height here in Saillon, I'm a bit luckier. Fronsac overall managed to escape a lot more than some areas. Saint-Emilion has been particularly badly hit. Pessac-Léognan also, to the south of Bordeaux, really badly hit. And so some poor wine growers, some of entre deux mers, between the two rivers, some of those people have lost, up to 100%, 80% is quite common. So that is really bad. Personally here, I was touched a little bit. We don't know the impact on the final harvest yet, but in fact, I had the insurance guy came today, and I am a little bit more hit than I thought I was. So that's disappointing, but it's still too soon to say what that will really have an impact in terms of the harvest. But it's clear that there are a lot of people a lot worse off than me.
Well, good luck. I hope it works out. Frost insurance, I guess that's a thing.
Yes.
I never really thought about it, but it's probably a reality if you're a chateau owner, to have that to protect you. Well, I want to thank you sincerely for joining us. I really, really appreciate your time and your sharing your knowledge with us and your experience. It's really cool. I think I'm jealous now, and I suspect a lot of people are. And hopefully we can all visit you in the not too distant future.
Yes,
so I'm going to show some websites so that Vin Fronsac is currently in French, but soon, as you heard, to be in English. And that's for both appellations, Fronsac and Canon Fronsac. Of course, Bordeaux.com is your great resource for everything. And if you would like to visit, if you haven't, sounds like some people already have, but you can visit Sally Evans's website, chateaujourset.com, and give her a shout when you're in the area and visit. And I just want to thank you so much, Sally, and good luck. We hope that the frost wasn't too damaging for you, and we hope that moving forward, the vintage is nice to you.
Yeah, great. And if anybody wants to follow what's going on behind the scenes, then follow me on Instagram, because I put up lots of pictures about what's happening in the winery or in the vines, and it's quite, hopefully, quite educational too.
I'm sure there's a link on your website to your Instagram.
And I just wanted to say thank you as well, Sally. Sorry to interrupt you, TJ. And it's great to meet you, if only digitally. We'll change that one of these days, hopefully.
And you. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
And what's next in a couple of weeks, Ron? We're in May.
Crazy.
We'll be continuing with our 6 families of Bordeaux wines, our journey. And I believe we're heading to the left bank.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yes. So,
so that's May 11th, Tuesday,
May 11th. And you can join us, as we've said before, you can join us every Tuesday at 11 a.m. for alternating weeks. 1 week it's Bordeaux, and the next week it's pre-shift with everyday tips for hospitality with Mr. Ron Edwards.
Yep. And that would be next Tuesday. We're going to talk about Greek wines and why you need them in your wine programs.
Yes. And you can always watch older episodes on our Winebow YouTube channel, and this will be posted soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and stay safe out there, and we hope to see you soon.